Hey there, folks. Welcome to my Retro Media Room. And today I decided to talk about my top 10 most valuable Sega Saturn games for my collection. So to start with, at number 10, we have Quake. And this is a very interesting title because they clearly built this game from the ground up for Sega Saturn, uh, based, off of the, and compared to the other versions of Quake. I mean, they did for the 64 as well. The 64 version is unique. This one's unique. Quite a bit different from the PC versions. They had to kind of rebuild them for each console for them to run on said consoles from the PC build. So this Sega Saturn version is no different. It has its own unique feel and look to it. It's very good. It's a solid port of the game and a unique port of the game that if you're a huge Quake fan and you want to play it in a way that's unique from the PC version or even the 64 version, and the current console versions of the remastered, this is actually a really cool way to play it. So I do recommend this. It's really neat. Of course, we got some. I love this. Got the brochure. Got the mail-in coupon. Very glad that these pieces. This is a very nice complete copy here. Of course, you got your foam pieces here. This is an authentic one. I have reproduction foam pieces that work just as well. Because I made it a point to, I wanted every Sega Saturn with these long box jewel cases. I wanted to make sure each and every one of them had the foam piece that they're meant for. It's literally like the way this is designed. It's intended to have a foam piece in the middle. So it's funny how these jewel cases are because they were not practical. They're huge. They look great. The artwork is fantastic, but they're not practical though. They take up a lot of shelf space. They crack easily and everything. Because of the wide area, they crack even worse than standard jewel cases that that became the norm. So I actually have reproductions of a lot of these. This is an original one, but I have a lot of reproductions of these to replace ones that were broken or cracked or whatever. And that doesn't really affect the value because a jewel case is a jewel case, even these unique ones. The only way you would be concerned with a jewel case being different is if, say like that Lost World Jurassic Park on PlayStation, where it had the textured front, so it would give the 3D effect on the booklet, or ones that, or like, you know what? Actually, I have it right here, or like D on the Saturn, where it has two discs, and so this is an unusual variant of the case because it holds two discs and there's two spots for it. So other than something like this, it really doesn't affect the value. It's just a case is a case as long as it's functional and looks good and not cracked or broken. You're good, right? So anyway, that was number 10, and number 9 we have X-Men: Children of the Atom. So this is the original, like, for those that know Marvel vs. Capcom, the fighting game series. This is the very first one of that entire series. So from the sprites that ended up that made it all the way to Marvel vs. Capcom 2. These same sprites from the game. So this is the original, or this is the very, very, very first out of all those games, right? And there's X-Men versus Street Fighter. There's Marvel superheroes. There's Marvel vs. Superheroes versus. There's all these variants, right? Now this game is very special to me because I played this in the arcade back when I was a kid, as I was watching the cartoon Saturday mornings, which I grew up on that cartoon. I love that cartoon, and so I'm sitting there, a big fan of the cartoon. I see the X-Men in the I see this in the arcade. And it blew my socks off. I couldn't believe how awesome it was animated, and a lot of like the same voice actor for Wolverine, and then some is in the game, and Cyclops. So you're sitting, I'm like, man, this is literally the cartoon come to life, like playing it. It's very cool. And the thing about the Sega Saturn is fantastic at 2D animations because it has more RAM. It has more RAM than the PlayStation does. So the Sega Saturn was an absolute boss at 2D based games. So these arcade ports of these 2D fighters on Sega Saturn were always far superior over pretty much everything else. So like this right here is a near perfect arcade port. It's virtually perfect. It is very good. The only console that did better at arcade ports than the Sega Saturn was the Neo Geo, but that was a very expensive console. We're talking I think it was like anywhere from $600 to $700 for the console, and it was $200 a game. It was literally a big cartridge with a mini version of the arcade motherboard per game. So I don't have that. I wish I did. The Neo Geo is fascinating. Then they sized it down to the Neo Geo CD, which is also very good. But anyway, a little history lesson there. But so that's number 9. So number 8, we have Doom on the Sega Saturn. So Doom, this is actually, I really like this port. Love the cover art, by the way. This is unique to the Saturn here. And once again, kind of like Quake, this is a pretty unique version. And although they didn't recreate the graphics as much in this as they did the Quake you could tell they rebuilt from the ground up for Saturn. This it's like, oh well, it's the environments we all know, just like you would think. But the interesting thing about Doom is that yes, it has a lower frame rate. It looks really sharp, but it has a lower frame rate. So they went with that. They decided to go for sharper graphics, lower frame rate. The PlayStation version is the best version, in my opinion, of this era. But the unique thing about this, though, is that while it moves slower, the rate of fire of your guns are faster than I've ever seen in another port. So it's actually a very interesting and fun way to play this game. I really like this version. I like the feel of it. I like the rate of fire of the weapons, and it's different. It's unique. So this is a cool port of the game if you're a big Doom fan of Doom and you want to have a unique way of experiencing it, kind of like that Quake. Okay, and at number 7, we have, and this is a little bit different because, so we have Shinobi Legions, we have Duke Nukem 3D, and we have Panzer Dragoon 2's Way. So, the reason I have 3 games here is because they're all worth the same. So, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to put them all 3 in the number 7 spot for fun, right? And take a look at each one. So, to start with, so we got Shinobi, which is funny because I was really late to collecting the Sega Saturn until like I was well into my 20s, and I have my collection now. But so I was late to the game with Saturn. I didn't have it growing up, but I did play a Saturn in a Toys R Us. It was a demo setup in the Toys R Us, and this was the game that was set up on that demo. And I remember it was really cool at the time. And once again, this is a 2D based digitized characters game. So the Sega Saturn, it does a really good job with the look of this game and the animations and everything. It's actually quite good. So I like this game, but it's very nostalgic for me because this was the first and only time for a long time that I ever touched the Sega Saturn, and it was this game that was out on that display, right? So very cool game. Shinobi, of course, is a classic series. A lot of people will be familiar with. Then you got Panzer Dragoon 2, which I have not played very much. I played the first one a little bit. They have the re-release of the first one right now, so there's multiple ways of experiencing the first one, which is a very good game. But yeah, this one is, I got a hold of this for a fair price years back, and thankfully I did because it's worth more money now. And of course, now I don't have, I'm just going to, spoilers here, I'm just going to say it, I don't have Panzer Dragoon Saga. That is one of the most, I think it's like the second or third most valuable Sega Saturn game in the entire library. So I do not have that. I wish I did. I could have gotten it for like $300 or $250, $300 like 10 plus years ago, but I just didn't want to drop that money at the time, and now it's like $600, $700. So I'm like, well, it is what it is, right? And then finally, we have for number 7, we have Duke Nukem 3D. This is a really cool port. Critics loved this port back in the day, and it is a solid port of the game, kind of like Quake. They built it from the ground up for Sega Saturn, and they kept all the adult content for the PC version, unlike the 64 version, which they brought the sexuality and language down and kept just the violence. And it's got everything, and it's a good port of the game. I really like the Sega Saturn version of Duke Nukem 3D. This is cool. Although I do love the 64 version, though. Like the 64 version is actually very cool. All right, and that was number 7. And for number 6, we have Earthworm Jim 2. So the first Earthworm Jim was on the Sega Genesis, and very well animated. Now that was actually a showcase for the Sega Genesis, though, how well animated Earthworm Jim was. It's a good game, and everybody, a lot of people love Earthworm Jim. They're classics, and this one has really gone up on the Sega Saturn. And obviously, I got the Sega Saturn version, because I knew this was going to be the best animated, best looking version of it that you could possibly get of the second one. Because there's multiple ports of the second one on Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis. I was like, well, if I'm gonna have and play this game, I want the top tier version of it. And that's going to be the Sega Saturn version, right? So yeah, and that's number 6. I haven't played it yet though, so I want to play this game. I need to play the first one still. I've only played it a little bit. All right, and at number 5, it's been on the channel before. We have Nights into Dreams with the 3D control pad. So once again, this is kind of a situation where I was at the store, and I remember it was at either Target or Walmart. I think Target, and they had a demo. Actually, you know what? That's right. So I played the Sega Saturn that game in that Toys R Us with Shinobi, and then I played it a little bit with the display they had in a Target or Walmart when they had this set up as a display, and I played it a little bit. So those are the only times that I can remember ever experiencing the Sega Saturn as a kid, because I never had it. Were these store demos they had set up? That's how it was back in the day. Back in the 90s, that's how it was for us kids. We checked out games with the demos they had set up in the store. So this has a standard jewel case, not for resale, of course, because it's part of the package here. Very interesting game, where you fly around, and you know it's got a pretty big fan following. So these are, and now you can easily tell that the 3D pad here is a precursor to the Dreamcast controller. You can clearly see that this is so. And this is, you know, it's a decent controller. I mean, this was their first attempt at an analog, because the Sega Saturn controller was like the original PlayStation controller. It was only D-pad, and the Sega Saturn controllers never had analog after that. This was the only analog that ever happened on Sega Saturn, was this whole controller. The standard controllers had D-pad only, whereas PlayStation introduced DualShock, which was brilliant, and that design has remained true to this day, pretty much. I'm just going to set this aside. All right, that's number 5. And at number 4, this is a surprise for me, is Primal Rage. So I bought this for like $30 years back, and I just wanted a version of Primal Rage, and figured, well, Sega Saturn is fantastic for fighting games, so I'm just going to get the Sega Saturn version. And it's an interesting, weird game. I played it in the arcade, and then, you know, I rented it. Well, mainly played it in the arcade. I always thought it was a weird game, and I liked it. I did rent it on Super Nintendo, I think, at one point. And yeah, this is worth a surprising amount now. It just shot up in value in last couple years. So that was a bit of a surprise. Okay, and at number 3, we've got Enemy Zero. So this is an interesting game here. So I showed it earlier as an example. We had D. So this is the creator of D and this, even though this is a separate universe, separate story. Like it says here, starring Jill Conniff, however you say it, of the band Lucius Jackson, the voice of Laura Lewis. So he wanted to have a character, because he took the woman from the D, and he reintroduced her into this, even though it's a different game, a different story, different universe, because he wanted to have a consistent face of a character model in different. So it was kind of an experiment that he was doing. He was pretty much thinking outside the box, how he wanted to have he created a character and then wanted her to be in different games. And she's in in D, and then in Enemy Zero, and then in D2. And so it was this weird concept he had. It was basically a concept he developed with the games he was making for Sega, right? And so like D, this is it's got pre-rendered cutscene backgrounds, you know, and as you move around, and slash some 3D some traditional 3D backgrounds, you know, it's kind of a aliens inspired space horror game. Now, unlike D though, because this has multiple discs, this has I think it has 4 discs. Yeah, this has 4 discs. Because this has 4 discs, that's just how it sits in here. You put them in slipcases, sit on top. And yeah, whereas the D was just 2, and it had that unique case to it, right? So this is just a standard case with discs put into slip covers and placed on top, right? It's a little bit different. So yeah, and here's an example. This case is actually a reproduction case that I replaced it with, right? And you wouldn't know the difference. It's just as good as any authentic. It's all the same. It's just a jewel case. because the one that came with it was, you know, scratched up or cracked or broken, and I just replaced it with this nice crispy one, right? All right, and number two, which this is, I'm gonna give you some little bit of history here. So you have Resident Evil. So the Saturn version is a very good port of the game. Some people prefer the Saturn version over PlayStation, and so the Saturn version is very good. I love this box art, cover art here. So once again, the Sega Saturn version had its own look and feel to it over the PlayStation version. It's the classic Resident Evil we remember, but it had there's some pretty clear graphical differences with the character models, the blood effects, and stuff like that. So it's unique. It's a pretty unique port of the game. And sorry for the camera shaking. I keep bumping the thing. I need to fix that. So yeah, this is a great version of the game, a great way to play it. But here's the thing. So when Resident Evil first came to America, or when it was Biohazard, well, here you see it's Biohazard in Japan, and then became Resident Evil in America for marketing reasons. They just thought, I don't know, they just thought Resident Evil sounded more cool, and they called it that, made it up. So they censored the cutscenes throughout the game, the intro, mostly the intro and the first zombie reveal. They censored a few things because they thought it was too much for America. Funny, right? So then the director's cut came out on PlayStation. They were supposed to add those scenes back in. Well, for whatever reason, they screwed up and didn't add them back in. They released the whole game with the whole intention of being a director's cut of adding the uncensored stuff back in, and they didn't. So to this day, there's no North American official release of Resident Evil that has the uncensored, the cut scenes, the cut moments added back into the intro and stuff. But because my Sega Saturn, and here's the thing, the Sega Saturn, there's a RAM card that you can get. There's a bunch of them, but you can get a RAM card for the Sega Saturn that you pop in the back, and you need a RAM card anyway. But these aftermarket RAM cards, it enables my Saturn to play imports with no modding, nothing special. It's super simple, nothing crazy. You just pop it in, and select an option, and boom, you can play imports. It's fantastic. I don't like to mod my consoles or anything, so if it's no modding like that required, I'm all for it. So I have a decent library of particular imported Sega Saturn games, and this one I imported because guess what? It has all of the cut content in the Japanese version that never made it to North America. So I thought this was really cool to have because I can play it and see the it's a way for me to natively see the uncensored stuff. So to see the uncensored stuff. So very cool. All right, and finally at number 1, we have Dragon Force. So this was not cheap even when I got it, but it's of course about less than half. I think I paid 80 or 90 for this, which was, I was like, that's a pretty penny, but I knew it was only going to keep going up, and it did. I always wanted to play this. I still need to, but I remember seeing the reviews for it when I was younger. I didn't have a Saturn, so I was like, well, I don't have a Saturn, I can't play it, but it looks cool. It's got some pretty cool full scale like battle. See this right here. I saw that. I thought, man, this game looks really cool. So it's a very good game. Critics liked it a lot. It's a Saturn gem, and pretty much everything from that Working Designs did. I mean, pretty much everything they did and released are worth money for the most part, like on Sega Saturn, on PlayStation 2, and so on and so on. So yeah, very cool game, beautiful booklet, awesome design, awesome artwork on the disc. And there's actually, if I remember right, I think there might be different variants on the disc. Don't quote me on that, but and it's funny, this is clearly not an authentic foam, but honestly, the reason I keep this in here, it's thinner foam. It gets the job done, but it's thin because the booklet's so thick that otherwise it has a hard time closing. So it actually fit just right, so I just keep that one in there. All right, that was my top 10 most valuable Sega Saturn games. I really grew to love the Sega. I always liked it as a kid and wanted to have one, wanted to play it, and then I've really enjoyed collecting it as an adult, and I have a whole appreciation for the Sega Saturn. If you all like this content, please give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that, and subscribe especially, and Hit the notification bell if you want to keep up with my latest videos. I post on a regular basis, easily 3 or more videos a week. And I'll catch you next time.